He had always been the quiet one in the classroom. Not the kind who drew attention or tried to be funny. He just liked to observe, sit at the back, and let the world go on around him. Most of the time he kept to himself, carrying a small notebook filled with sketches and little doodles he made when the lessons got too long or too boring. People didn't notice him much, and that suited him just fine. But today, something was about to change. The classroom was buzzing with the usual chatter. Some students were joking around, trying to make each other laugh, while others were focused on the work in front of them. The teacher, known for a playful and sometimes mischievous sense of humor, was moving around the room, stopping here and there, asking questions, teasing a few students and laughing along with them. Today, he seemed particularly energetic, and there was a glint in his eye that made some students nervous. As the lesson went on, the teacher decided it was time for a little fun. He clapped his hands and called the class to attention. "All right, everyone, let's see some talent today," he announced with a grin. Students exchanged curious looks, some whispering to each other, some sitting up a little straighter, wondering who might be called on. He looked around the room and then pointed directly at the quiet student in the corner. "You, come on, show us what you can do." The student froze. All eyes turned to him, and for a moment, he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. He didn't know what to do. He had never been asked to perform anything in front of a group before, and the thought of all those eyes on him made his stomach twist. The teacher chuckled, clearly expecting a funny or awkward moment. "Don't be shy, just show us a little something," he said, trying to encourage him in his usual teasing way. The class snickered, some already leaning forward to watch the inevitable awkwardness. The student shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his notebook. He wanted to disappear, but he knew he had no choice. The teacher's teasing tone left no room for refusal, and besides, the other students were all staring now. As he got up slowly, he felt a mix of fear and determination. He might be nervous, but he also had something inside him that had never been seen by anyone in this classroom. Something he had kept hidden for a long time. The teacher had no idea what he was about to witness, and neither did the students. All they expected was a funny failure. But sometimes the quiet ones have the loudest stories. The student walked to the center of the room, his heart pounding. The chatter in the classroom seemed to fade away, replaced by a tense silence. The teacher leaned back slightly, still smiling, waiting for the entertainment he assumed he would get. The student took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. He remembered all the hours he had spent practicing his little talent in private, the moments when he had stayed late after school, or woken up early just to perfect it. Nobody had ever seen it, not even his closest friends. He set down his notebook, took another deep breath, and prepared to begin. The class leaned in, sensing that something different was about to happen, though they had no idea what. The teacher's smile remained, but there was a flicker of curiosity now. He had expected laughter, but maybe, just maybe, there was more to this quiet student than met the eye. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The student closed his eyes briefly, gathering his courage, then opened them and started. What followed was unexpected. Every movement, every note, every line he drew or every word he spoke, depending on the talent, was precise and full of skill. It was clear he had spent countless hours honing this ability. The student's eyes widened, whispers starting to ripple through the room. The teacher's grin faded slightly, replaced by surprise. He hadn't anticipated this. He had thought this would be funny, a moment of embarrassment for the student, but instead, it was captivating. The performance continued, each second drawing the students deeper into what they were witnessing. Some couldn't believe their eyes. The quiet student, who had always been so reserved, was suddenly the center of attention for reasons that made everyone stop and stare. Laughter and teasing were gone. Instead, there was awe, admiration, and a sense of disbelief. The skill was not just good, it was extraordinary, something that had clearly been nurtured in private for a long time. By the time he finished, the classroom was silent for a moment, as if everyone was trying to process what they had just seen. Then, slowly, applause started. First one student clapped, then another, until the room was filled with genuine appreciation. The teacher himself was clapping now, his expression a mix of pride and surprise. He had played a joke, expecting to see the student flustered, but instead, he had witnessed something remarkable. The student, still catching his breath, felt a wave of relief and pride. The fear that had been so heavy just moments ago melted into a warm feeling of accomplishment. For the first time, he realized that being quiet didn't mean being unnoticed, and keeping to himself didn't mean he had nothing to offer. Sometimes it just meant that the right moment hadn't come yet. As the class settled back into their seats, the teacher gave him a nod of respect. He had learned a lesson today, too. Never underestimate someone based on their silence. The student returned to his seat, a small smile on his face. He knew things had changed. The other students looked at him differently now, not with teasing or curiosity, but with genuine interest and admiration. And in that moment, the quiet student understood something important. Skills, talent, and hard work don't need to be shouted about. They can shine brightest when they are least expected. Today, in front of the entire class, the world had seen a glimpse of something extraordinary hidden behind a quiet exterior. It was a moment that would stay with him forever, the moment when being forced into the spotlight revealed the incredible ability he had always known was there. The moment he sat back down after the performance, his heart was still racing. Even though the class had clapped and the teacher had looked impressed, he couldn't shake the nerves completely. It felt strange to be seen like that, after spending so long blending into the background. He tried to focus on his notebook, acting like everything was normal, but his hands were still slightly shaky. He had shown a part of himself he had kept hidden for years, and even though it had gone well, the sudden attention felt heavy. The classroom was still buzzing, though not in the same playful way as before. Instead of jokes and small talk, students kept whispering about what they had just seen. Some glanced toward him, not with teasing expressions but with genuine curiosity. A few even seemed amazed, shaking their heads as if they still couldn't believe what had happened. He kept his eyes on the paper in front of him, pretending to scribble something, hoping to calm down. The teacher returned to the front of the class, trying to regain control of the room, but even he seemed slightly distracted. He looked at the quiet student a couple of times, as if replaying the performance in his mind. He hadn't expected anything like that, and it showed. When he spoke, his voice didn't carry the same joking tone as before. Instead, he sounded thoughtful, almost respectful. But despite the applause and admiration, the student felt unsure. It all happened so quickly. One moment he was being pulled into something he didn't want to do, and the next he was surprising the entire class. Now he didn't know what to think. Would things change? Would people start talking to him differently? Would they expect more from him? The idea made him nervous. He liked his quiet corner. It felt safe there. When the class ended, students began gathering their books and bags, but instead of rushing out like usual, several stayed behind, talking about the performance. Some were excited, others shocked, and a few were already arguing about which part had been the most impressive. He stayed seated, hoping the crowd would thin before he had to walk out. Eventually, a couple of students approached him. They didn't come with jokes or smirks like before. Instead, they asked simple, sincere questions. How long had he been practicing? Where did he learn it? Did he do it at home? He answered quietly, keeping his voice steady, but his mind kept racing. It felt strange to be the center of attention, but not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. The teacher came over as well, his expression softer now. He placed a hand on the student's desk and nodded. That was impressive, he said, almost sounding apologetic for making him perform without warning. You really surprised all of us today. The student felt a small wave of relief. At least the teacher wasn't upset or trying to turn this into another joke. He simply appreciated the talent he had seen. It made the student feel a little lighter, even though the attention still made him uneasy. But as he walked out of the classroom, he noticed something else. People stepped aside for him. They didn't ignore him like before. Some even smiled or nodded. He wasn't used to that. Felt like the world had suddenly shifted a little. He wasn't invisible anymore. At lunch, he found his usual spot under a tree near the courtyard. It was quiet there, away from the crowds. Normally, no one bothered him in that space. But today, as he sat down and opened his lunch, he heard footsteps approaching. A small group of students stood nearby, hesitating before coming closer. They didn't seem pushy or loud. They looked genuinely curious. "Hey," one of them said, "could you show us again sometime? That was really cool." He blinked, unsure how to respond. It wasn't that he didn't want to share his talent. It was more that he didn't want to become a showpiece for people's entertainment. Still, they weren't mocking him. They weren't demanding anything. They were simply interested. So he nodded politely. "Maybe," he said quietly. They smiled and walked away, leaving him alone again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the lonely kind of silence he had known before. It was peaceful, full of new possibilities. Even so, the pressure began to build inside him. What if people expected something big from him now? What if they thought he could perform perfectly every time? The idea made him anxious. He didn't want to disappoint anyone or become someone he wasn't ready to be. When he got home later that day, he went straight to his room and sat down with his notebook. The familiar feel of the pages helped calm him. He flipped through his sketches, memories of all the quiet hours he had spent practicing, learning, and improving. He had never done it for praise. He did it because it made him feel alive, peaceful, and free. But now everything felt different. The world had seen a glimpse of that talent, and he didn't know what would happen next. He didn't want attention, but he didn't want to hide anymore either. It was a strange balance to find. That night he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the moment the teacher pointed at him. The laughter from the students, the pressure, and then the way the room fell silent as he performed. He could still hear the applause, the surprised whispers, and the teacher's impressed tone. Felt unreal. He wondered what the next day would be like. Would people talk to him? Would they ignore him like before? Would the teacher ask him to perform again? The uncertainty made his heart beat faster. Morning came quickly. When he arrived at school, he walked through the hallway with his head slightly down, unsure what to expect. But he soon realized that people were looking at him, not in a mocking way, but with respect and interest. Some smiled, some nodded, some whispered to their friends with wide eyes. He felt shy but also a little proud. It was the first time he understood what it felt like to be recognized for something he had worked hard on. For years he had practiced alone, unsure if it even mattered. But now he realized that his effort had meaning, even if he had never planned to show it. The pressure didn't go away, though. He felt like people were waiting for him to do something impressive again. And while part of him wanted to share more, another part feared failing in front of everyone. He wasn't used to being watched. When he entered the classroom, the atmosphere shifted. Students who usually joked or ignored him suddenly greeted him. One even offered him a seat closer to the front, but he chose his usual spot. He wasn't ready to change too much too fast. The teacher walked in and paused when he saw him. There was no teasing this time. Instead, the teacher spoke with a more serious tone, saying that yesterday had been a reminder that every student has hidden strengths, and sometimes, all it takes is giving someone a chance to shine. Hearing that made the student feel a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, pride, and a quiet sense of responsibility. Maybe this moment wasn't just a one-time thing. Maybe it was the start of something bigger. As the day went on, students continued to ask him about his talent, but they were gentle, not pushy. Some even asked him for tips or wanted to learn from him. Felt strange, but also nice. He didn't feel like the invisible kid anymore. Still, deep inside, the pressure grew. People now expected something from him, and he wasn't sure if he could meet those expectations. He had never wanted attention before, and now he had more of it than he knew what to do with. But as the day came to an end, he realized something important. The pressure he felt came from fear. Fear of disappointing others, fear of failing, fear of being seen. But maybe this wasn't something to run from. Maybe it was a chance to grow, to show more of who he really was. And so, as he walked home that afternoon, his steps were slow but steady. The world around him felt different, and he felt different too. He didn't know what part 3 of his story would look like, but deep down, he understood that he wasn't the same quiet kid in the corner anymore. Something inside him had shifted, and though he was nervous, he was also ready to see where this new path would lead. The next morning felt different from the moment he opened his eyes. It wasn't the usual slow start where he dragged himself out of bed. Instead, there was a strange energy inside him, part nervous, part excited, part unsure. His mind kept replaying the moment he had performed in front of the class, the look on everyone's faces, the applause, the way things had changed so suddenly. Still didn't feel real. As he walked to school, he kept his head down, hoping the world would stay quiet around him. But deep inside, he knew things wouldn't be the same anymore. People had seen a side of him he had hidden for so long, and now there was no going back. He wondered if today would be even harder than the day before. When he stepped through the school gates, he quickly realized that the whispers hadn't died down. If anything, they had grown louder. Students from other classes seemed to know about what had happened. Some pointed him out as he walked by, others nudged their friends and whispered with wide eyes. He kept his expression calm, even though his heart felt like it was beating too fast. He reached his classroom earlier than usual, hoping to settle before everyone else arrived. The quiet helped him breathe. He took out his notebook, flipping through the pages like he always did when he needed comfort. The familiar lines and sketches steadied him. This was his safe space, a reminder of who he had always been. But soon enough, classmates began to enter. They didn't rush past him like they used to. Instead, they greeted him softly, some with shy smiles, others with excited voices. A few asked if he would show them something new today. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply gave them a small smile and said, "Maybe later." He didn't want to promise anything he wasn't ready for. When the teacher arrived, the room settled quickly. The teacher glanced at him with a thoughtful expression before starting the lesson. There was no teasing today, no jokes aimed at him. Instead, the teacher seemed almost careful, as if he didn't want to make the student uncomfortable again. It felt strange but also comforting. Throughout the morning, he could feel the eyes on him from time to time. Not in a judgmental way, more in a curious, hopeful way. It was like everyone was waiting for a moment when he might reveal something amazing again. The pressure made his shoulders tense, but at the same time, he felt a tiny spark of pride. Being noticed wasn't all bad, he realized. It just felt new and overwhelming. By lunchtime, he decided to escape to his usual spot outside under the tree. The fresh air always helped him think. But before he could take even 2 bites of his lunch, someone approached him. It wasn't a group this time, just one student. Someone who rarely talked much, just like him. "Hey," the student said quietly, "I wanted to ask, how did you get so good?" He looked up, surprised that the question came not with excitement or pressure but with genuine interest. He thought for a moment before replying, "A lot of practice, and I just enjoy doing it." The student nodded slowly, as if understanding something important. Then they said, "I wish I was good at something like that." There was no jealousy in the voice, only a soft longing. He paused, feeling something shift inside him. "Everyone is good at something," he said. "Sometimes you just haven't found it yet." The student smiled faintly before walking away, leaving him alone again. For the first time, he felt something new, like maybe he could help others too, even if he didn't fully understand how. After lunch, he returned to class, feeling calmer. But that peace didn't last long. Midway through the day, the teacher made an announcement. "Tomorrow there will be a small assembly for our grade. Some students will be sharing their talents. If anyone feels comfortable performing, let me know after class." As soon as the words left the teacher's mouth, almost every head in the room turned toward him. His stomach dropped. He looked down instantly, pretending to search for something in his bag, hoping the attention would shift away. But it didn't. During the rest of the lesson, he felt the weight of expectations sitting on his shoulders like a heavy backpack. He tried to focus on the teacher's words, but his mind was full of worst-case scenarios. What if he failed? What if he disappointed everyone who believed in him now? The fear of failure clung to him like a shadow. When the bell finally rang, the teacher approached him gently. "You don't have to perform if you're not comfortable," the teacher said softly. "No pressure." What you shared yesterday was already more than enough. The student nodded, grateful for the understanding. Still, the thought lingered in his mind like a stubborn echo. Should he perform again? Was this his chance to grow, or was it too soon? He walked home slowly, thinking about it. The sky was a pale shade of blue, and the cool air brushed against his face. Everything around him felt calm, but his thoughts were anything but. Part of him wanted to hide. Another part wanted to step forward. It was like two versions of himself were fighting quietly inside. When he reached home, he placed his notebook on his desk and sat down. He flipped through the pages slowly, remembering the hours he had spent practicing alone. He remembered the small mistakes, the improvements, the excitement he felt when something finally turned out right. That joy had always been personal, never shared. He picked up a pencil and started practicing again. Not for the class, not for the teacher, not for anyone else, just for himself. As he worked, he felt the tension in his chest slowly fade. The room felt peaceful again. By the time he finished, the sun had almost set. The soft orange light filled the room, making everything look warm and calm. He sat back, staring at his notebook. Maybe performing again wouldn't be so bad. Maybe it would be another chance to show what he loved doing. Maybe it could even help him grow. But fear still lingered. What if this time the audience wasn't impressed? What if people compared today with tomorrow and thought he wasn't good enough? What if he made mistakes? He closed the notebook gently, trying not to overthink. He decided he would sleep on it and let his heart choose in the morning. That night, he dreamed of standing on a quiet stage with a soft light shining on him. There were people watching, but they weren't judging him. They were simply waiting, patiently, ready to see whatever he wanted to share. When he woke up, the dream gave him a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The next morning, he walked to school with slow steps. His mind wasn't completely calm, but it wasn't as chaotic as before. When he reached the classroom, the teacher approached him again. "Did you think about the assembly?" the teacher asked kindly. He took a deep breath. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "And?" the teacher asked. There was a short pause before he answered. "I want to try." The teacher smiled, not with excitement but with respect. "I'm proud of you for making that choice. Whatever happens, you're growing. And that's what matters." The student nodded, feeling both nervous and relieved. He didn't know what tomorrow's performance would look like, or how people would react. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't running anymore. The rest of the day passed with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Students continued to ask him questions, but he kept his answers brief. He didn't want to ruin the surprise, and he didn't want to raise expectations too high. When he got home that evening, he practiced quietly, making sure not to push himself too hard. He wanted tomorrow to feel natural, not forced. He wanted to perform the way he had always practiced, calm, focused, and true to himself. As night fell, he sat by the window watching the sky darken. Tomorrow would be a big day, maybe the biggest one yet. He didn't know what would happen, but he understood something important. Sometimes, life pushes you forward even when you feel like staying still. Sometimes, the world sees something in you before you see it in yourself. And sometimes, the moments that scare you the most are the ones that can change your life forever. And with that quiet thought, he closed his eyes, ready to face whatever came next. The morning felt different from any other day. The air was cooler than usual, and the sky looked like it had something important to say but was still deciding how to say it. Everyone in the small group sensed the change, even if no one said it aloud. They gathered near the old wooden table, the same table that had become their planning spot over the past days. Their journey had not been simple, and each of them carried the weight of moments they were still trying to understand. There was a quiet tension as everyone waited. It wasn't fear. It was something more complicated, like knowing you were standing at the start of a road you couldn't fully see. They knew the next decisions would matter more than anything before. They also knew that once they chose a direction, there would be no stepping back. One of them leaned forward with arms crossed on the table. They were usually calm, even when things got rough, but today their voice carried a seriousness that made everyone look up. "Before we move ahead, we should talk honestly," they said. We've come far already, but the path ahead isn't going to get easier. If we're going to continue, we need to do it with clear minds. No doubts. No confusion. The others nodded, but no one spoke right away. Someone tapped their fingers on the table slowly, like trying to gather courage. Another looked around the room, searching for the right words. Finally, one of them spoke. I know everything feels heavy now, but look at how far we've come. Every challenge we faced, we handled it together. I don't want fear to make us question our purpose. We didn't start all this to walk away before reaching the end. Their voice was steady, and hearing it made the others relax slightly. Someone else took a deep breath, their eyes softening. It's not fear, they said. It's just reality. Things are changing faster than we expected. And the moment we step outside today, everything will shift again. I just want us to be ready. All of us. Their concern wasn't a sign of weakness. It was care for everyone sitting at that table. There was a moment of silence, but a calm kind. The group knew the truth. They needed each other. They had reached a point where trust was not optional. It was the one thing that could keep them from breaking apart. After a while, one of them stood up and walked toward the window. The sunlight reached only halfway into the room, but it was enough to bring warmth. Look outside, they said softly. Everything out there is uncertain. We can't change that, but we can choose how we face it. Together or not at all. Their words settled into the room like a gentle reminder. The group didn't need dramatic speeches or promises. They just needed the truth spoken plainly. And that was exactly what they got. When everyone finally stepped outside, the air felt fresher, almost cleansing. The streets were quiet, but the quiet didn't feel empty. Instead, it felt like the world was giving them a moment to gather strength before things moved again. They began walking, each step steady but thoughtful. They passed familiar places, an old bench they had rested on days ago, the small path beside the tall brick wall where they had argued briefly, the corner shop that always smelled like warm bread. These places had become part of their story without them realizing it. For a long stretch, no one spoke, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Sometimes silence can hold more meaning than words. The road ahead required focus, and each of them was preparing inwardly. Eventually, the path led them to a wider open area, one they had been planning to reach since the beginning. It wasn't dramatic to look at, but it carried importance. From here, the trail split into two. One direction looked rough, a rocky way that seemed harder but clearer. The other looked peaceful on the surface, but something about it felt uncertain, like it was hiding more than it showed. The group gathered at the fork. One of them stepped forward and crouched down, running a hand over the ground. The left path looks safer, they said. But that doesn't always mean it is. The right path looks tough, but at least we can see what we're getting into. They stood up and dusted their hands. Someone else turned to the others. We choose together, they said firmly. No one decides alone. For the first time since morning, a small smile appeared on one person's face. We've made every decision together so far. Seems only fair to keep going that way. They all stepped a little closer to the split. The moment had weight, but it also carried a quiet confidence. Every challenge they had faced had prepared them for this. There was no rushing, no pressure, just a shared understanding that the next step needed to come from the heart, not fear. Finally, someone spoke in a soft but certain voice. I think we should take the harder path. Not because it's difficult, but because it's honest. We can see what's coming. We can prepare. And we've already shown we can handle things when we know what we're dealing with. The others thought about it. One by one they nodded. Felt right. Real. Not chosen out of worry, but purpose. They moved onto the rocky path, adjusting their pace so no one fell behind. The stones beneath their feet were uneven, but they learned quickly how to balance. Some parts required helping hands. Some moments brought quick decisions. But every step reminded them why they were still walking together. As they climbed higher, they noticed the world opening up around them. The view stretched far, wider than they had imagined. Valleys, hills, winding trails, they could see it all. And for the first time in a while, they felt something lighter than fear, Hope. They stopped to rest on a flat stone. Someone let out a small laugh, the kind that escapes naturally when the heart feels lighter. Another gently nudged them, smiling too. "I think we made the right choice," someone said quietly. "We did," another replied. The wind blew softly around them, like the world was acknowledging their courage. They didn't know exactly what waited ahead, but they finally understood something important. Strength doesn't come from knowing every detail of the future. It comes from choosing to move forward even when the future feels foggy. After resting, they stood up again. Their steps were steadier now, their breathing calmer, their hearts more determined. The path ahead continued, twisting and rising, but it no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a story they were finally ready to write. And together, they kept walking, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The days that followed were different in a way the student never expected. The room that once felt heavy and full of eyes waiting for him to make a mistake now felt warmer. People who barely noticed him before started nodding at him in the hallway, giving a small smile or quietly saying they liked what he did in class. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, and sometimes it felt strange, but he also felt something new. A small sense of confidence he had never felt before. The teacher, who had called him up as a joke, behaved differently too. There was no trace of amusement or the playful tone that the teacher usually carried. Instead, there was respect and even something like pride. The teacher often glanced at him during lessons, as if surprised all over again by what had happened. But what surprised the student the most was that the teacher no longer looked at him like someone who blended into the background. Now he was treated like someone with real potential. One morning, the teacher approached him before class started. The room wasn't full yet, and the early light came through the windows, giving everything a soft glow. The teacher didn't joke or act amused this time. Instead, the teacher spoke in a calm voice and asked if the student had ever thought about joining a certain after-school group. It was related to the skill he had shown in class. The student had never even thought about joining anything before. Usually, he just went home, finished his work, and stayed out of trouble. But now someone was telling him he belonged somewhere. At first, he didn't know what to say. It was new for someone to believe in him like that. He looked down at his hands, feeling unsure. The teacher didn't pressure him. The suggestion was gentle, almost like an invitation, as if the teacher wanted him to know he could say no if he wanted to. But for the first time, the student realized he didn't want to say no. He wanted to see where this could lead. So he nodded quietly, and the teacher gave a warm smile. When he finally attended the after-school group, he walked in with slow steps, expecting to feel like an outsider again. But it didn't happen. The other students were surprised to see him there, but not in a teasing or doubtful way. Instead, they were curious. A few of them remembered what he had done during class and gave him encouraging looks. The room was filled with people who were passionate about improving themselves, and for the first time he felt like maybe he fit in. The coach or leader of the group asked him to show a little of what he could do. He felt the same nervousness from before, the same fear that maybe his performance in class had been a lucky moment or that he wouldn't be able to repeat it. But he pushed those worries aside and gave it his best. When he finished, the room wasn't silent out of shock like during class, but full of appreciation. The leader clapped, and soon everyone joined in. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was warm and supportive. In the following days, he began staying after school more often. The group meetings made him feel alive in a new way. He practiced, learned new techniques, and slowly opened up to some of the other students. One of them even told him they were glad he joined because it made the group feel more complete. That simple comment stayed with him for days. The teacher also checked in with him every now and then, asking how things were going. These conversations were short but meaningful. It was clear the teacher wasn't just being polite. The teacher genuinely cared. And the student couldn't help but think back to the moment when the teacher had randomly called him up in front of everyone. What was supposed to be a joke had turned into something that changed everything. Over time, the student's confidence grew. He didn't walk with his head down anymore. He listened more carefully in class, spoke up when he had something to say, and even helped others who were struggling. He learned that he didn't have to hide his abilities or pretend he had nothing special to offer. He discovered that sometimes people only realize their strengths when they were pushed into unexpected situations. One day, the school announced an event where students from different classes would showcase their talents or projects. The students' group was asked to participate. When the announcement was made, the student felt his heart race. The idea of performing in front of the whole school was intimidating. But something inside him had changed. Instead of fear swallowing him whole, he felt a challenge calling him. When the day of the event arrived, the school's hall was filled with noise. Students talking, teachers preparing, families taking photos. The student waited backstage, taking deep breaths. His group stood around him with encouraging smiles. The leader reminded him that they were all there together and that he didn't need to do anything more than what he always did during practice. When it was finally their turn, they walked onto the stage. The bright lights hit them, but this time the student didn't freeze like he might have before. He focused on what he had learned and the support he had received from everyone around him. When he began his part, he gave it everything he had. And something incredible happened. The crowd started reacting halfway through the performance. The sounds of surprise and excitement echoed through the hall. And when the performance ended, the applause wasn't just loud. It was full of pride, the kind that makes your heart feel warm and heavy at the same time. He could barely believe it. His group members patted his back, smiling wide. But what touched him the most was seeing the teacher in the audience. The teacher's expression wasn't one of surprise anymore, but admiration. It was clear the teacher was proud of him. The moment felt surreal. He had come a long way from being a quiet student who avoided attention. After the event, some younger students came up to him, saying they wanted to learn how to do what he did. He wasn't used to being someone others looked up to, but he felt a responsibility growing. In him, maybe he could inspire others the way he had been inspired. As the school year went on, his life continued to change. He worked harder, practiced more, and became someone others trusted. People didn't see him as the quiet student anymore. They saw him as someone strong, talented, and determined. And while the shift didn't happen overnight, it felt like every day brought him a little closer to who he was meant to be. He often thought back to the moment when it all started, when the teacher asked him to perform as a joke. At first, he had felt embarrassed and unsure. He had expected to fail or be laughed at. But instead, that moment revealed something he never knew he had inside him. In the end, the experience taught him something important. Sometimes life pushes you into situations you'd never choose for yourself. Sometimes people underestimate you without meaning any harm. But those moments can open doors you didn't even know existed. What mattered most was how he responded, not with anger, but with courage. And that courage changed everything. The teacher's joke had become a turning point in his life, a moment that led him to discover his own strength. And with that strength, he stepped into a future he had once been too shy to imagine.